Now, zero knowledge proofs is why I believe that it's the key that will unlock everything. It's the mechanism that enables this trust automation at industrial scale. And there is nothing else that can do it. All the other scaling methods that are not based on ZK are not actually scaling anything. They don't scale computation. They're using some tricks where you can say, okay, I'm not going to verify every single thing that's happening on blockchain, but I still going to believe that things are going to be all right because you trust other people, because they have some incentives, because they have some stake that can be slashed, whatever. And we've just seen with recent exposures in the US politics how these banks were abused with their power to manipulate the banks, deplatform certain people without due process. It's actually very important to have direct, full verifiability of the systems. And zero knowledge proofs is the only technology that is available today that can actually let you verify everything.
Hello and welcome back to Mind with CoinFund. My name is David Pakman. I'm head of venture investments at CoinFund, and I'm here with my partner and co-host, CoinFund CEO and founder Jake Brukhman. Hey, Jake, how are you?
Hey, David. Doing really well. Can't believe it's the end of the year. Crypto space is ending 2024 in a very different place than where it started, and I'm feeling very bullish on what's to come. But instead of focusing on predictions, I want to know if there was one trend, David, one moment, or one theme from crypto in 2024 that you're reflecting on that characterizes the development of Web3 over the last year.
Well, Jake, I don't like to look at sort of short-term narrative because, you and I focus so much on investing in companies and projects and technologies that will prosper 5 to 10 years from now. But it would be impossible not to point to the influence of the crypto community in political circles in the United States and abroad. We've gotten, as a community, more accomplished on the regulatory acceptance and political acceptance of this community as one that wants legitimacy and wants to innovate more in this year probably than in any other year in crypto's history. So it's really hard, I think, not to point to that as the signature observation of the year. And, I've been involved in tech for a long time, and tech also achieved incredible amounts of community-oriented political and other power and influence. And the problem when you get that is you have to now use it, and you can use it in ways that are productive and helpful and build things, or you could use it like in sort of petulant ways. And you could see like tech has done a little bit of both, or in some ways like tech has even built products that appeared good for us, but maybe aren't. I read that all of Australia is going to ban social media for everyone under the age of 16. I thought social media was pretty incredible when it started to appear in the mainstream. So with power comes great responsibility. But that would be my biggest takeaway. How about you, Jake? What's yours?
I have to agree with you, David. I mean, we can't ignore the big changes that have happened. Our advisor, Chris Giancarlo, recently went on a podcast and he said, there's essentially been a sea change in how our government views crypto. And it's just a very, very different regime. In many ways, it's the opposite. In many ways, it's poised to fix what I would characterize as a stagnating approach to innovation America has had over the last like 15 years. And so I'm just really excited for all the crypto founders to be able to build stuff, to just have America be participating and in the lead here. And of
Hey,
course, that
let,
has,
let me riff on that, Jake, with you, because it was very strange for me, and I wanted to know if you felt this way, to be working on a leading edge of technology that had been painted with all sorts of some justified, some not, negative sentiment. But generally, like we're talking about software developers building new software that impacts like global markets and created a new asset class and decentralized governance and all sorts of really cool things. And yet to not be sort of welcomed in the United States, in our own country, which has always been this beacon of innovation, to do so. That was a very strange dichotomy for me for years. How did you feel the same way?
I've always experienced America as a land of opportunity. As many people know, I'm an immigrant here, always like supporting the really, really big innovations like the internet, which by the way underpins crypto as well. And it's just been honestly been kind of sad just to watch us fall behind a little bit, but I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we're now kind of getting through that. Democracy is working, and we will get to a place of innovation. And maybe that's a good segue to say that another, or I should say, a thread in this like supply side technology that's now kind of poised for big success. We've been paying a lot of attention in 2024 to the development of zero knowledge proofs. While ZK has been a problem cryptographers have been trying to solve, long before Bitcoin was conceived. I think it was actually thought up in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. Its alignment with crypto's thesis of decentralization and also finding all the use cases within crypto is a really, really interesting development. We're seeing ZK being applied to centralized identity, to payments, even integrations with AI, and of course, the scaling of blockchains, as we'll probably get into in this episode. And so it's fitting that we're having one of the earliest crypto founders in this sector join us in today's show to discuss scaling Ethereum with zero knowledge. He's the co-founder and CEO of Matter Labs, one of our portfolio companies, which is behind zkSync, one of the most popular ZK rollups in Web3. Please welcome Alex Gluchowski to our show. Hi, Alex. How's it going?
Hi, Jake. Thanks for having me.
It's been, I think we met each other for the first time in the summer of 2019. It's the fall of, or even winter of 2024. So it's been about 5 years. Tell us a little bit about zkSync, your vision for Matter Labs, and this 5-year journey.
Well, it's a 6-year journey, and we just celebrated exactly 6 years from the first commit in the zkSync repository. And it's been an incredible journey for me. It started as a side project for DevCon 3, turned into this incredible community of hundreds of thousands of people united by a shared purpose. To me, zkSync is first and foremost a movement driven around the mission of advancing the freedom for the world using zero knowledge proofs and ZK in the blockchain context. It's an extension of blockchains. Blockchains are probably the most impactful mechanism we have today to advance freedom since the invention of the internet. And zero knowledge proofs is probably the ultimate technology to help blockchains scale in such a way as not to lose the properties that made them valuable and to create this immense value for humanity. And we can talk deeper on why this is the case, but this is just this marvelous piece of mathematics and cryptography that is really beautiful from if you look at it as an engineer or scientist. So zkSync is now more than just a single rollup. It has undergone several stages of evolution. It started as this very research-oriented, application-specific thing that we could build back then. 6 years ago, the zero knowledge proofs were not as mature as they are today. And it was not clear how long will it take for the breakthrough that will enable the productivity at the scale that we need. But this happened. And so it transformed from this roll-up focus on payments and swaps to the first general purpose zkVM to now this first ZK rollup cluster, this network of rollups that will be connected and can scale elastically by the power of ZK.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just stay on it for a little bit more, Alex, just because we do get a lot of developers who listen to this podcast. Could you just talk a little bit about if I'm a developer building a decentralized application, a dApp, and I'm choosing, am I going to do something in EVM or something not in EVM? Am I choosing a modern blockchain? Am I worried about scalability and cost per transaction? How should developers think about and approach zkSync?
Look how developers should approach blockchains in general. If you are starting an application, EVM-based blockchains are your best choice today. To me, it's absolutely obvious because you don't want to lose time on solving problems that are not most critical for your core competency or core mission. Like you want to avoid, like I remember the debates 10 years ago when people were deciding on like how to scale websites, and you could go with this like a bunch of very complicated solutions. Like I remember things like Rancher and whatnot. And at the end of the day, the easier, simpler solution you pick, the better off you were because you could really focus on solving your core problem instead of worrying about all this infrastructure. So today, this means Solidity and EVM, because the best practices around code quality, like all the tooling, everything that exists around EVM are uncomparable to anything else. Like even if you're proficient in traditional languages like Rust and whatever, Web2 languages, cannot really, as of today, transfer this knowledge into blockchain development because the tooling is not there. But it's there for EVM. But more importantly, for you as a founder that is starting a project or like deciding what to build, where to build, is your access to labor markets and security auditors and like companies that will help you achieve security on chain. And that is by far easiest to do with EVM than non-EVM chains. And now if you're building on the Ethereum landscape or EVM landscape today, Ethereum is your best choice because there is no better settlement layer in the world than Ethereum. And everything you can do with alternative layer ones, you can now do on Ethereum L2s. And so it's just a question which L2 you pick. And you have multiple options. And honestly, currently they are not, like none of them are that great. It's still an open thing. Because you have optimistic rollups that are kind of going in a dead end right now with the choices they're making, and you have the zk rollups that are not quite there, have not yet closed these gaps on usability and performance where the optimistic rollups are. So like it's quite an unstable equilibrium, but I know that it's going to change early next year because zk rollups are about to close this gap, and then it's gonna be a lot more interesting for application builders. But if you are building a blockchain, either you have an existing project with an existing user base, you're deciding where to build, like zk is an absolute obvious choice today. Because zk is something that will give you sovereignty and control over your project and will nonetheless enable you to be connected to the bigger ecosystem, which is not the case with anything else that is currently available. Because the optimistic rollups will have very hard time scaling interoperability and going into the 2025.
So maybe just one last question on this. You talk about the gap between optimistic and zk-based rollups, and you've got some confidence that the beginning of next year is when that gap closes. What specifically needs to close? What is the gap?
We need full EVM equivalence at the cost scale that optimistic rollups have today. So you have to be able to do what you can do on optimistic rollups and pay the same or less than what you currently pay in optimistic rollups. If you look at the costs today, zk rollups are like roughly an order of magnitude more expensive. As of today, like this is about to change now because the reason optimistic rollups are so cheap is because Ethereum is heavily subsidizing data availability today with blobs that are underutilized. Like Ethereum is being used by all rollups as the data availability layer, which has a finite capacity and it can be extended up to a certain limit. And today it's not fully utilized and it costs basically zero. This is probably a right choice from the Ethereum design perspective because Ethereum needs to grow and needs to help L2s scale faster and like instead of imposing unnecessary costs today. But that hides the actual cost profile of like what rollups are actually gonna be spending once this data availability layer is not zero anymore. Because the before AP 4844, this upgrade of Ethereum introduced early this year, which lowered the costs for data availability like by 2 orders of magnitude, zk rollups were 50% cheaper than optimistic rollups. You can look up like at the time where Arbitrum and Optimism were at $1, zkSync would charge you 50 cents for transactions. Because zk rollups have mechanisms that enable data compression to be done much more efficiently than optimistic rollups. Because we can do something like publishing state diffs instead of publishing full inputs of every transaction. And that means you can reuse existing slots and like actually go to super linear compression, like posting much less data than the number of transactions. But this will be relevant again. The most important thing we need to solve now is just to bring the performance of zk or the costs of individual zk transactions down to the levels that we observe with optimistic rollups and do it with EVM equivalence so that all tools 100%, like every single tool works exactly the same way as they work on other L2s, optimistic L2s. And this is happening.
Awesome. Alex, I want to get your perspective. So you mentioned when you guys were starting out, ZK was very, very early. You made a lot of progress since then. In particular, I remember back in those days, like the big question was, what will we be able to get generalized ZK verified computation online anytime soon? I remember some people were estimating that to be like 5 to 10 years away. That's not what happened. It seems to have gone much faster. And in fact, you guys launched, I think, about 2 years ago, which was early 2023. So
Yes.
what is your perspective on that? Why did it seem to go faster than prognosticated, or did it? And does and I have a kind of a spicy question, which is like, once we have this like very generalized verifiable computation all over the place, maybe not just in rollups, does that actually start to disintermediate some of the functionalities of like smart contract programming in general?
This is a great question. I would need to think for a second how to explain this. I mean, it's probably that the estimates were wrong based on people lacking data. It was a very novel field, and judging by the previous speed of development of zero knowledge proofs, which date back 30 years, you could think that if it took 30 years for us to get here, it will probably take us 30 years to get a like comparable impact on performance, because the performance that we had just 6 years ago was nowhere near today's numbers. So you could think we cannot get like possibly 1, 2, 3 orders of magnitude improvement in such a short time if it took us 30 years to get here. And I think what helped shorten this time is that people who were building the systems just were not aware that it's supposed to be complex. We just thought like, well, like we just didn't know it's impossible, so we jumped on it, and all of a sudden it worked. What this will mean for general disintermediation of everything, not just smart contracts. You can think of all sorts of things that require trust that can be now replaced programmatically in a much more efficient way than what we can do with smart contracts. Because if you think about it in a grand scheme of things, blockchains are trust automation machines. They enable you to make a commitment, specify this commitment programmatically, and then enforce this commitment without relying on any single party. This is what institutions and authorities use to perform in a lack of blockchains. You would go and make a commitment, like a contract, and then you would rely on this powerful people to enforce this commitment. And now you can rely on machines. And as always is the case when you automate things, the costs go down and the quality goes up on general mass automation. Now, zero knowledge proofs is why I believe that it's the key that will unlock everything. It's the mechanism that enables this trust automation at industrial scale. And there is nothing else that can do it. All the other scaling methods that are not based on ZK are not actually scaling anything. They don't scale computation. They're using some tricks where you can say, okay, I'm not going to verify every single thing that's happening on blockchain, but I still going to believe that things are going to be all right, because you trust other people, because they have some incentives, because they have some stake that can be slashed, whatever. But it's not like you're not, living in full the values of Bitcoin and Ethereum with this don't trust, verify maxima, which was there for a reason, which is a very, very important piece of this cornerstone of blockchain technology. Because with Bitcoin and Ethereum, you don't have to trust validators. They just do their job. And if they don't do the job well, you can always work away, and you have mechanisms to actually enforce their correct behavior. But with alternative systems where you don't verify directly every single transaction, that's not the case. You actually have to trust them, just like you trust the banks or other institutions, because they have a lot at stake. Their reputation and whatnot. And we've just seen with recent exposures in the U.S. politics how these banks were abused with their power to manipulate the banks, deplatform certain people without due process. So they might have a lot to lose, but not necessarily for you. So you actually want this full control. It's actually very important to have direct full verifiability of the systems, and zero knowledge proofs is the only technology that is available today that can actually let you verify everything. The actual computation compressor can process millions of transactions all in parallel, recursively combine these proofs together, and then have every single person in the world using their smartphone to verify it in 1 second. That is true democratizing of access to this trust automation. And yes, it will go beyond. Like I think smart contracts will remain because you need a domain-specific language to describe things. Just like you will not write a website in Rust. You will not write machine learning in C++. You do it in Python or JavaScript or TypeScript. Like you need certain things, you need certain components and libraries and interfaces to interact and describe what you're programming. But there are a lot of things where you will be able to plug in existing systems that are currently running on trusted hardware and trusted environments and put them on these trustless, ownerless networks that are self-enforcing. And this will see the going on chain for a lot of different types of institutions, different functions that are trust creating. Yeah, more than just DeFi smart contracts, more than just the things we see in the crypto world today, way more.
Alex,
I think
stay on that because we've talked for a long time about like what zk can accomplish just by its nature. And you've built basically a platform, right, to get the benefit of it. What do you think some of the candidate use cases are that are likely to adopt something like zkSync and therefore zk in the short term? Let's call it next 2 to 3 years. Which kind of applications do we expect to see?
I think what's going to happen is everyone, especially now with the new political situation, a lot of Web2 companies will be looking at Web3 and will be looking on how they can integrate it. And it will start with something as simple as payments. But this time we will actually be able to make this reality. So like payments and internal processes. So all of the enterprises, fintech companies, institutions that are a little more advanced in their thinking are now looking at this and thinking, how can I accept payments in crypto? How can I turn my internal processes that are doing accounting and are doing all sorts of settlements on the crypto rails? Because it's a lot more efficient. It's just like you have to pay a lot less for security if it's all secured by math and these decentralized networks than if you have to run it on your server, and any mistake in the server is really hard to audit, really hard to spot, and you really have to build an entire system of supervision with people, security processes, DMZ, cybersecurity protection, and so on. What we'll see happening is those Web2 entities will be going on chain with their own private networks. This is what they want. This is what they have experimented with for the last couple of years. What they learned is the hard thing about it is that you will then stay isolated. It does not really help you that much. On the one hand, they want this control and privacy and sovereignty over these networks and permissioning in certain ways. On the other hand, they want to be part of this bigger ecosystem. And that has not been possible before. This is now changing with zk, and specifically with what zkSync is building. This is the whole idea of the elastic chain. You can take this framework for building blockchains that is EVM compatible or even EVM equivalent. So everything just works. You can use all the best practices. You can take the engineers, auditors from the existing Web2, Web3 space, bring them over, build your own system, launch it, have your own control over what's happening there, but nonetheless be part of the broader ecosystem because you have interoperability secured by zero knowledge proofs. You can not only have control, you can have privacy of this data. You can take an existing neobank, bring it on chain, have people have native ownership of crypto assets there, native payments directly settling on the crypto rails, and allow them to connect to Ethereum and to connect to other rollups and to other networks in this zk elastic chain and settle between each other while preserving the privacy and ownership of your own network. This is new. This has never been possible before. This is now becoming reality with the advances in this interop technology. And with advances in performance as well. Performance is very
Yeah.
important. And one thing people have a misconception about that is that zk proofs appear very expensive because you have to pay for proofs. The reality is the zk can fundamentally outcompete all other scaling technologies on performance in terms of throughput and latency. Because if you are using zero knowledge proofs for security, instead of relying on the consensus of multiple validators, what you can do is to put a single server, beef it up massively to make it like the most performant machine possible, with the entire state held in memory, with only access to database, with things going like insanely fast on the server, very low latency, immediate confirmations, very high throughput. And then with a short delay, you produce the proofs for these things so that you always settle the blocks on your settlement layer on Ethereum with full security, and you can never finalize an invalid transaction. So it does not matter that the server is operated by a single entity. They can have the highest, like unbeatable performance. No blockchain that is decentralized, that has even a couple of validators, can compare with running this single server, which is obviously not something that you can use in decentralized setting. Obviously, decentralized blockchains are decentralized for a reason. They must be owned by community. They must be like having many validators, have full resilience on Byzantine fault tolerant consensus and so on. But you can have those networks that are super high performant that are plugged in into this interoperable thing.
I'd love to dive into the kind of the app chain thesis that you alluded to with Elastic Chain. We could talk about Elastic Chain in particular as well. But 5 years ago, we were in this world of monolithic blockchains, and people are making the case like it's okay, everyone's just going to go on the same block. In fact, some people made the case that everyone's just going to go on one blockchain, which was Bitcoin. I never, I never believed that. People made the case, no, we're actually gonna have a bunch of layer twos, and they're going to create different scalability options and different architectures for people. And now what we're actually seeing is that we're going to like layer three, right? Like every L2 also has some kind of toolkit or ability to launch your own sort of dedicated chain. And we're starting to enter this more app chain thesis. So I'm curious, like, it seems like zkSync era is with Elastic Chain is doing a similar thing. You're making the case that zero knowledge creates the best profile for efficiency, interoperability between those chains. My question is, like, how important is this app chain thesis for the future adoption? Like, do you see like most businesses having their own chain, or do you still see kind of people co-locating on a monolithic chain for better interoperability or something like that? Like, what's your view there?
So it's going to be a spectrum. I think that crypto native apps, like for crypto native apps, it rarely makes sense to start as an app chain, because again, you always, as a founder, as a startup, you want to focus on your core competence. You want to delegate as much as possible, like things that are outside of your zone of genius, and that means you're better off launching on an existing blockchain to find product market fit, to test your hypothesis, to figure out what works and start scaling. But I believe that most successful applications will eventually become their own app chains. And we see this happening already. The trend is starting to be set with things like Lens, for example, going from an app to their own app chain. Treasure DAO going from an app like a framework, a community on a single blockchain to launching their own chain. We'll see a lot more of these use cases, or these cases in the crypto native world, simply because it does not make sense to share the block space and environment with things you don't care about. Like if your application, if it's a suitable use case where you can move funds in once and then do a lot of operations in there, something like an decentralized exchange or some other DeFi platform, then why would you want to share priority fees with other bots that are interacting with some completely different DeFi applications? Or if you're building a social network, why do you need to bother about DeFi and all the AI craziness and meme coins and whatnot? If you can just
Well,
focus on your
it creates this risk where I would say like the majority of stories of people going off to their own app chain, they usually cite exactly what you're saying. They usually cite like, fees spiked, and it was just because some third party was, doing an ICO or selling crypto kitties or something like on the chain, right? Recently, what was it? Our portfolio company WorldCoin moved to their own app chain called World Chain, citing very similar things. And when I think about like going out into the enterprise world and sort of the culture and mentality of building software in that world, I have a hard time people accepting a third party risk that they just don't have any control over, that like one day like our performance is just going to become degraded because we're sharing a chain with somebody else. Do you agree with that?
More than this, I think what we see with the enterprise use cases is they want control, not necessarily only about performance, but also about permissioning and about privacy. This has been a blocker for many applications, many projects could not have gone on crypto because it would expose everything they're doing, and this is absolutely not acceptable. Like, we're so conditioned to think that public blockchains have to be absolutely transparent because there's no other way we can do it, that we miss this bigger picture of like we have the survivor bias, not seeing things that could have materialized if they were available.
Yep. Yep. And maybe that's a good segue into just kind of like vertical versus horizontal scaling, right? Like, so there's currently a general debate going on between high throughput blockchains like Solana and maybe, Ethereum scaling approach. Um, to me, the way I understand it is, when we talk about Solana, we're talking about kind of vertical scaling, meaning we take the nodes, we make them more powerful, and we try to keep up with the demand. And we could probably take that pretty far while keeping the number of nodes sort of fixed. And when I think about horizontal scaling, that's when I think more of, L2s or even L3s. Whereas if we need a little bit more computation, we just add kind of the next app chain and we have a little bit more throughput. Your thoughts on that? Like, is vertical or horizontal scaling going to eventually win? I mean, I think I suspect what you're going to say, but like, what is your technical view here?
You obviously need both. You want individual chains to be very highly scalable, and you want to be able to extend this network elastically, as we call it. As the demand rises, the supply should be able to match the demand. And this is what's called elasticity. I think that with Solana specifically, Solana is not competing with Ethereum layer 1 for being the most resilient and decentralized settlement layer. Solana is directly competing with Ethereum L2s. And I think it's not like it works today, but it's not a very sustainable position to be, because L2s can fundamentally outcompete Solana. It requires higher performance of zk than we currently see today, and this is coming. We can fundamentally do more TPS, thousands of TPS, with less servers, less validators, while having higher security than Solana, because we inherited from Ethereum directly through the magic of zk, through this mathematical verifiability. Obviously, so we will have both. We'll have more land and higher skyscrapers built on that land in our crypto city.
One question that we ask Alex, and I think maybe we're going to end up staying on the same topic, of course, which is, what is no one else talking about in crypto that they should be? And, maybe the answer is elastic chain, but if you just go up a little level here from where we've been and just think through like what has actually evolved and happened in the infrastructure level in crypto, what should people be noticing more and talking about?
So one thing we've already touched about is privacy. I think
Mhm.
this is a big miss because we don't see anything happening, and we just assume that things are either not possible or people don't care, which is not the case. People do care. Similarly, people care about security. Not everyone is a degen. We have like high reputation institutions looking at blockchains, building on blockchains, and deliberately picking blockchains with the highest degree of security. But I think the one thing that has been missed from the public discussion, that I think we should be talking more about, is that fundamentals actually matter. The decentralization and resilience of Bitcoin and Ethereum really matters, and this is what enabled crypto to survive the political turmoil which we have experienced for the past couple of years. If it was a little less resilient, it would be possible to shut it down completely with a lot fewer means than what was attempted. We should not get complacent and think that, oh, the political winds have changed and now we're safe and nothing bad is going to happen to us anymore because look, we got Elon Musk and he's going to tweet about Doge and whatnot. This is not the case. We cannot predict the future, and we've seen how fragile this balance was, and how close of a call this was this time. And you don't know what's happening in 4 years, in 8 years. You know that government can be evil and can abuse powers if they have too many powers. So you really want to be working constantly to bring these powers back to people, back to citizens, making sure that we're building systems that take us from this world of don't be evil, which we know how it ended, to can't be evil, that are self-enforcing. This mission-oriented blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum has done really well. This is what zk is going to do at scale. This is very important. Like, if we allow, again, if we keep repeating the same mistake, saying like, oh, these guys are good. Like, I remember this debate from a couple of years ago where optimistic rollups were launching without fraud proofs, and people were saying like, oh, sure, but they're going to implement them soon. Like, those are good guys. Like, let's just take it. What can possibly go wrong? And what then went wrong was a lot of people were forking that code of these optimistic rollups and then launching their own instances of these rollups without good teams backing them, and with just 2 or 3 multisig controlling the entire system without any decentralization, any checks and balances, any thoughts into building a resilient security system. These things can perpetuate and they can degrade the security standards and just the high bar of what we consider acceptable in crypto. And we should not, because eventually, if you keep lowering the bar, at some point it will be too low and you will run again in situations like Mt. Gox, FTX, and many other examples of this.
So Alex, let's stay on this for 1 second. So I want to try to square a couple different important topics that you raised. One, just maybe an historical analogy. When the commercial internet was being deployed, we heard from traditional legacy companies, we're never going to send transaction information over the commercial internet because it's totally public. We don't own the infrastructure, can't trust it. Then we got SSL. So now at least we can encrypt the data, but we still don't trust it. We're going to build intranets or extranets. We're going to use IP protocol, but we're still going to control the endpoints ourselves. We don't trust the wires. We don't trust anything to be decentralized. Distributed was the word, right? Now, of course, everything goes over the commercial internet. Everyone packetizes their, SSL encrypted data. You pointed out that it doesn't make sense for everyone to build their own chain in the Web3 world because, why would you try to have to develop the expertise of building your own chain when you're trying to build some application? But you pointed out that you don't want your transactions to be clogged up with someone else's CryptoKitties or meme coin transactions, which provides, unclear pricing and unclear costs and unclear performance. But we also are hearing from a bunch of traditional institutions that I don't want them to be permissionless. I want to control who can deploy on my chain. I want to know who runs the nodes. We want to permission the nodes. But you speak about the importance of decentralization, right, and building these networks. So let's fast forward a few years. Which parts of the infrastructure remain decentralized? Which parts of the infrastructure are still built by the community versus the permissioned and private needs of some of the adopters you talk about?
Oh, I think the trend is clear. The crypto native projects are winning. Just like the network state is winning over the traditional power structures. The relationship to the end user is going to be more and more on the application layer rather than on this. I think it's going to be a transition process where the smartest institutions and smartest companies from the Web2 world will realize that and will self-disrupt and will transition to offer the ownership to their customers in a lot more, in a long stronger way than what they have now, giving people full self-custody and full control over their assets. and also the ability to exit, just like this happened with the internet. I think the internet analogy is brilliant. I remember the time where the telecom companies were trying to figure out, like, how do we now, like, stop all these people that are going to the internet and are going to have international calls that used to cost $10 per minute to, like, completely free. How do we capture this value from all these applications that are going to pop up on the internet? And the answer is, you really can't. Like, what you can do is you can reinvent yourself and create services that are valuable to your customers and let them use those services in this new way. It's an unstoppable thing. But I think it's important to have this transition, to allow them this smooth transition where they offer, if you're an institution or like a fintech with like hundreds of millions of users, you cannot just have them like go connect, send all of your funds to a wallet and then YOLO into any random applications on Web3, because half of them are going to be scams and people are going to lose money and they won't be able to guarantee, like, to have this gradual educational transition for the users of what this new Wild West really means, until we figure out ways to make this experience a lot safer. Just like this happened with the internet as well. Like, a lot of websites in the early days, a lot of web shops were scams. People would put in their credit card information and they would get robbed. But then we figure out things like SSL and websites with ratings and anti-fraud systems and so on. The same process is happening in the Web3 world. And the more mature we become, the more secure we become, the better the user experience is going to be in the Web3, the faster this process is going to take place of migrating the users from the classic Web2 platforms to full ownership of their Web3 identities and assets.
I would be remiss not to ask you about the technology that underpins ZK. So you mentioned we made a lot of progress. My question is, where are we in ZK right now? What are the problems of the moment that are kind of top of mind, and where are we going to be in a couple of years?
We are in a really good place. We're making tremendous progress. The mind share of the ZK community is in improving performance above all else, because performance is really what underpins all the other things we have, including privacy. If you can have more expressive programming primitives that are a lot cheaper to compute, a larger amount of computation that you can do, you can just do more things. ZK in general is going in this direction. The protocols are getting better. Hardware is getting better. There is specialized hardware just for proving being developed. All of that is improving. And then what we are focused on, and companies that are doing similar, like that are playing a similar role, is productizing ZK to actually take all of the advantages of these improvements and turn it into usable products and package it in some form in which they create most value for people. So like it's just a normal process. I cannot single out any any specific interesting movement. It's just like increase performance, lower the cost.
Got it. Alex, if people are starting to market kind of dedicated hardware, does that mean that the industry is kind of converging on a few proof systems that they think will kind of be the most used?
No, the way it's happening right now is similar to how GPUs have been evolving. With GPUs, you're not bound to a specific set of algorithms that you can compute on them. It's a generalized, parallelized platform where instead of a single processor with 8 cores, you get a processor with 32,000 cores. Each of them can do like a small set of operations around floating point math, but it can do it like relatively efficiently, but you have a lot of them and you can do like the more you can parallelize the process, the more efficient you can create the algorithm for GPUs. I think the most promising path for proof acceleration is going to be building GPUs, but instead of floating point operations, they are focused on cryptographic operations, just operations on finite fields cryptography with a few primitives that are being used in basically all cryptographic protocols. And then again, you will be able to program any algorithm, but the parallelism, this massive parallelism of these efficient operations is going to help you prove any current and future implementations of various cryptographic protocols.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really insightful that it's actually going to be a more generalized type of hardware. And maybe like as a checkpoint, Alex, like what's the differential today between kind of a naive computation and a ZK verifiable computation? And how do you see that gap kind of closing?
That's a really good question. And the answer is a range. And I don't know exactly. It depends on specific application that you're proving. Can be anywhere from 300. 300x is the lowest I've seen, with thousands of x
Hmm.
over
And
native computation.
and do you see that approaching zero? Is there some theoretical limit of how efficient, the extra computation would need to be?
I don't know. I am not such a deep expert on science to be able to
Okay.
make like, possible claims on where the actual limit is, but I don't think there is any fundamental. It's probably asymptotically harder to improve the closer you get
Hmm.
to this 300, 200, 100x. It's probably reachable, and it is probably already the case for some computations.
Hmm.
But below that, it's probably going to get very, very hard.
Gotcha. And so do you see like the primary scaling mechanism, essentially parallelization of these computations versus like making the system itself like more tractable?
All of it. We still have a lot of gains to make on the algorithms, on hardware, and on more efficient ways to parallelize.
Hmm.
But we are now approaching the cost levels that are like more or less negligible because data availability is going to be more expensive. And we already see this with optimistic rollups, like reaching those limits. Like recently, blobs got saturated and the fees spiked. The block space itself is limited and it leads to bottlenecks and this leads to congestion pricing on those transactions. All of it is going to be more expensive than the proofs of the underlying or the costs of the underlying proving for those transactions.
Well, we're getting near the end. Any other key questions you want to get in, Jake or Alex? Anything we didn't talk about?
Alex, can people find out more about you and Matter Labs, and what do you want people to sort of pay attention to that you guys are focusing on heading into 2025?
The best way to follow the news is to subscribe to zkSync on the x.com, our Twitter account. We'll be having some really interesting publications in the near future, and we're very excited about all the partners launching on the Elastic chain. We have several blockchains live now, and about a dozen is launching by the end of this year, and more are launching in the beginning of the new year, and it's becoming a really vivid, vibrant ecosystem of specialized chain, of general purpose chains, which I encourage people to really pay close attention to.
Amazing. Well, we're super excited for you guys at CoinFund. And as I said, it's a great time to be in the L2 business, I suspect. So good luck converting your customer funnel, and we'll check back in 2025.
Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. We really appreciated having you on the show. That was Alex Gluchowski, the co-founder and CEO of Matter Labs. For those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for listening. If you feel passionately that we got it right or wrong today, let's keep the conversation going. Leave us a review. Let us know what you thought. You can always reach out to me and Jake. You can follow me on X, Twitter. My handle is PAKMAN. And Jake's handle is JBrook. That's spelled JBRUKH. Please make sure you download our podcast wherever you get podcasts. And we'll be back soon to dig in deep on ideas that are worth fighting for and talk more about building the next internet. Thanks, everybody.